We're in Maseches Beitsa, Daf Lamed Beis Amud Aleph. Yesterday we did the Mishnah, the new Mishnah, which appears in the middle of the page. Ein pochsin es haner. We don't diminish from the blob of clay, which was going to make the ner. We don't gouge out a chunk of the clay to make it into a ner, mipnei shehu ose kli, because that is tantamount to making it into a kli, which of course is asur, at least midrabanan. Ve'ein osin pechamim b'yom tov. It's funny that it puts in the word b'yom tov here because we're talking always about Yom Tov. All these Mishnayos are about Yom Tov. It hasn't said the word Yom Tov in a while. All of a sudden it says Yom Tov, as if we haven't been talking about Yom Tov before. It's strange, I'm not sure. And it's also true that we're not allowed to do it on Shabbos, but of course there would be no Havamina to do it on Shabbos, because you're not allowed to light any sort of fire. So to singe a wick would certainly be a problem. For some reason, we would think that it's mutter to do on Yom Tov. Says the Mishnah, no, it's not mutter. Because also it's making a kli.
What about using sijal wick? Is that making a kli, right?
That's what Rashi says. It's tantamount to making the kli, since it's perfecting the kli. Perhaps it's makabah patish, even if it's really the last perfection of the kli. Perhaps it's even makabah patish. And certainly making a tikkun, Rashi mentions tikkun, that sounds more like an isur d'Rabbanan of tikkun. Ve'ein chayt chinas ha-pasila. We're not allowed to cut down the pasila. I suppose that means it's too long. I need to cut it down to make it appropriate for the wick that I need. That's also, it's already a wick. I'm not making it a better wick. I'm just making it the proper size. You would think maybe that's also mutter, and that's maybe the biggest kiddush of them all. That I'm not changing the structure of the wick. Whereas when I singe the wick, at least I'm changing the properties of it, the structure of it. Works better. Here it's not working better. It's what I need. It's more appropriate to what I need. I need a certain length, and now I have that length that I need. So apparently that's also called the last step in making the kli, is to make the proper size as well. And the last chiddush in the Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda Oimer Chudka ba'ur. Right? Or is the light, and ur is the fire. That's why we talk about Avram Avinu coming from ur kastim and not or kastim. He jumped into the fire, that's ur, as opposed to the light is or. In any event, so he says that we're allowed to use a flame to make the incision, as it were, to cut down the wick by burning in the middle of the two parts. So you have one section on one side of the burn and one section on the other side of the burn, and the burn is what made it into the size that you needed. But I suppose the Tanakama might not allow it because it's making a tikkun nonetheless. But maybe Rabbi Yehuda's point is that it's a shinui. I don't think Rashi comments on that. Rashi just says the Gemora is going to explain why, according to Rabbi Yehuda, this would be better than a knife. In any event, I imagine it's not the normal way, so therefore maybe it's a shinui. But if it would be so clear, then the Tanakama would agree, but it sounds like the Tanakama disagrees. So there must be some kind of an issue. That's what Rashi says, the Gemara is going to explain. Okay, shall we review the Rashis on the Mishnah, or shall we go on to the Gemora?
Let's do the review the Rashis on the Mishnah.
Okay, Shabbatai, what's your feeling on the subject?
Yeah.
Okay, so why don't we split up the Rashis? One of you start with the first Rashi, and then there's basically two major Rashis here. Who wants to start with the first Rashi?
could start.
Go ahead.
Ein Poischim is haner. One cannot diminish the container for the oil.
Right, well, we're going to see it's not really a container per se, it's a glob of clay.
Little echad min ha-beitzim shel motzar. To take out one of the, before we take out from the ball of clay.
Not take out from it yet, it's not yet getting to that part, it's just saying, I suppose they have in the refrigerator or somewhere that where they have something stored of like a chunk of clay, which is calling a Beitsa of clay. Every potter must have his storage of where he keeps his little ballies, his little chunks of clay. So you want to take one of those, and what would you want to do with it?
Shel yotzar.
Yotzer is a person who creates pottery, so it's another word for potter. Manufacturer of pottery.
Lach toiv.
No.
Lis choiv.
Right.
A gropoi is to insert it into his fist.
Right. To take his fist and insert it into the glob of clay.
Into the midst. The chakuk ner. To carve out of it a candle.
Well, again, when we translate it to English as a candle, we kind of miss the point. It's not what we call in English a candle.
Container.
It's the container that's going to contain the oil, that's going to then contain the wick and all of that. So let's not get confused by calling it a candle. So basically carve out the container which will contain the oil, which they call ner. That is called a ner.
Keruzal balas.
Yeah, French word. Okay, so Rashi told us what we're not allowed to do. Now, why are we not allowed to do it?
No, sure, it's because you're making it clean, a building, right?
That's right. It's not exactly building because we said before, Ein Binyan B'Stir. Right, we hold there's no real malacha of building or taking apart something in a kli. A kli is not really a place where you have a problem of the malacha of building, as it were. So if we get, again, I don't want to get confused and think we're talking about the malacha of building, since we know there is no malacha of building in a kli. We once mentioned that the real Isser of building is in something's connected to the ground, like a house or other things that are connected to the
Can I
ground.
ask a technical point here?
Yeah.
He starts off by saying, don't do this, right?
Well, he's not the Mishnah.
He's a Mishnah. Ein pochim, so that's the opening statement.
Right.
Then he goes on to explain all the positive things you do.
Yeah, well, it's like saying this is what you're not allowed to do. You're not allowed to do the following.
You take your fist, you put it in,
That's what you're not allowed to
you
do.
engrave, you...
This act, which the Mishnah just describes in a very short way,
Yeah.
Rashi's saying, okay, let's take that word out and let's put in the real thing there. What are you really doing when you say that word? So when we say you're not allowed to do X, what is the X? Rashi says, you know what the X is? To take the glob, and to do this, and carve it out, and do that. That's what the Mishnah is saying you can't do. Let's say I would say you're not allowed to take a trip on Shabbos. So if there would be a Rashi on my words, he would say what Rabbi Faerman really means is to get in the car and to go like that is one thing that's usher, or to go outside the Techum is usher, but just to walk from here to the old city would be mutter. Okay, so you sometimes have to clarify that when someone says a statement that you can't do X, that could have a few ways of understanding it. I'll tell you just parenthetically, which I don't know if it's a real problem or not, but this same verb that we're using here in the active sense, ein pochesin, is the same verb that was used in the previous Mishnah in the passive way, if you've noticed. By shenifchas.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And then Rabbi Meir says, af hochsin nifchat is the first passive use of the verb, and then Rabbi Meir uses the active sense, and he says you can even actively make a hole in the wall. Poches.
Right.
That's the same exact verb as we're using here. So I might have actually thought, well, I remember the last Mishnah, it meant making a hole in the wall. So maybe here I'm making a hole in the, I don't know, in the nair or something. If I want to be consistent with the previous Mishnah, I would have really made a big mistake without Rashi. So Rashi says, really, the word poches really means to diminish. So when you talk about a wall, how do you diminish a wall? You create a hole in the wall. Here, you're diminishing what? So Rashi has to start with the process. You take a glob of clay. And then once you have that in front of you, you want to diminish that. How do you diminish that? Again, it's not like making the hole in the wall, but here you are carving out a hole in that glob. Not a full hole, because it doesn't go all the way through. Right? You leave the bottom so that it will be a proper container.
And you're making a globet.
I'm sure if I knew how to laugh at that joke, I would have.
Isn't that what it's called? It's a goblet, sorry.
Oh,
Not a
goblet.
goblet. A goblet.
Yes,
What did I say?
interesting.
Globet. A goblet.
I thought you were trying to make a play on the word glob.
No,
From the glob, you get a glob it. Anyhow.
Yeah.
At least you can kick him under the table. I can't do that.
That's why I want him to sit over there.
Yeah.
It's getting closer.
understand.
It's getting closer and
I
closer.
understand why you get him farther away.
I'm a gentle guy. I'm not
Not a kicker.
a.
Yeah, well, some people
You're
have
done.
to kick start them. Okay, now, so I'm just pointing out that one of the extra jobs that the Rashi has here is to try to make sure you don't get confused, because how strange it is that the previous Mishnah and this Mishnah use the same exact word, but do not quite mean the same thing. When you think about it, each one is diminishing from the object in its own way. But you end up with something completely different. If I have a wall, to be poches that wall is to create a hole in the wall. Like I said to you, there's a Mishnah in Sukkos, in Masechah Sukkah, that talks about Bayis Shenivchas, the same exact lashon, but it means the roof caved in. And there, the discussion is, well, can I just lay skach across that hole in my living room ceiling, and I won't even have to leave the house? I could just have a sukkah right in the middle of my living room.
I know Lebanon does that.
Mm-hmm.
Take up on the roof and build a sukkah.
That's right. A lot of people. I remember in England specifically, one guy had a number of different places. No, actually, he had one place that he just rolled off the roof. But in Muncie, this guy perfected his house. He could be in his bedroom, he was in a sukkah. He was in his dining room, he was in a sukkah. He made a whole thing where he was able to measure out all the things and have a roll-out roof in almost every room. But obviously the Gemora is not talking about a roll-out roof, but it's talking about a case where somehow or other a hole developed in the roof. Now you want to, before you fix it, you might as well monopolize on it and benefit from it before you make it back into a regular roof. At least have a good sukkahs, right, in the middle of your living room. It's be a mechai. You want it to go out of the house at all, right? As far as I'm concerned, that would make my holiday. I remember we used to have a sukkah right in front of our building. It was such a schlep. Always have to take everything out there, take everything back in. Not only in and out of the building, but up and down the stairs. Now we finally had the Mazel Baruch Hashem, the schus to build on. With the rest of everyone had a schus to build on to the building. We ended up, through my wife's wisdom, to add on enough to make a porch that's right off our living room now. We can actually stay in the house, as it were, and still be in our sukkah. But to actually stay in the living room, that would be even better. So,
To actually stay in bed would even be better.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. The guy in Muncie was able to do
I
that.
spend my whole day in bed.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I remember the old days serving my mother breakfast in bed. That was considered like the biggest luxury you could afford someone, is serving them breakfast in bed.
Makes it less.
Well, we had a nice big tray, and I just remember if we wanted to show our mother we loved her, we would serve her breakfast in bed. That was how we all knew that was our.
My father always told me, eat at the table.
That's right. The Gemora says it actually. The Gemora says, person should always eat at the table.
My father used to tell to eat in the kitchen. If you were naughty at the table, go take your food into the kitchen. So
Right.
many
That was
times.
the most embarrassing thing you could do, being sent into the kitchen.
And then he was there making dinner. We had to go eat in the kitchen.
Someone told me there's a little, like almost like a stool or raised platform in their living room, and if anyone is ever bad, go sit on the stump. You know, that was always like the worst form of punishment.
Yeah.
Just the embarrassment. All right, getting back to the point. So I think that the word poches or nifchas obviously comes from the idea of lessening or diminishing an object, but in each case there's a slightly different result or procedure for doing that. So with the roof caved in. With the wall, someone must have made a hole in the wall, right? Or Rebbe Meir says you go ahead and make a hole in the wall, no problem. But in our Mishnah, that Rashi knew that wouldn't fly, so he had to take time out of his busy schedule and use a lot of extra ink to tell us this whole procedure. Take the glob of clay and do this to it and do that to it. And Rashi had to take out the time because he doesn't want us to be confused, right? Rashi is the biggest Baal Chesed. Rashi knew we might be confused. Here we had the word used in the previous Mishnah twice, once in its passive form, once in its active form. In both cases, it meant to make a hole in a wall. So when we came to this Mishnah, one might have been very confused. So Rashi takes out time and energy and ink, and he spends time telling us what's really going on here. And it's amazing chesed that Rashi did. Imagine he did it without even receiving a salary. All right, so next Rashi. Shabbatai, you're up at the batter's box.
Okay. I'm going to diminish this Rashi.
As long as you don't make it to charcoal. Ein osim pechamim.
Ein osim
Pechamim.
pechamim. They don't make charcoal. Okay. Nihu nami kli, nihu. So that these are also called a kli. It's also called a kli.
Right. These are also called a kli. They are, so to speak. They are. They definitely, like the repetition of the word they kind of emphasize. They really are.
The tzorech zahav.
Okay. For whom is it considered a kli to have something that is either real charcoal or at least a singed object? Sorfei zahav. People who
Purify gold.
purify is a better word for it. What's it called? When you take a metal and you, not distilling, it's, what's it called? It's like purifying, really. Right. Anyhow,
Refine.
Refine, I think that's a better word. People refine gold. Okay, somehow, I'm not sure what he means, somehow they use either real charcoal in that process or just a singed object, or maybe even a wick, I don't know. Now, here in our case, I'm not, why Rashi mentions that people purify gold, that's not what we're talking about in our Mishnah, meaning our Mishnah would never say don't do it for refining gold, because obviously you can't refine gold on Shabbos, on Yom Tov. So for some reason Rashi maybe chose a case where people are more familiar with making a singed object. But now we're talking about a pasila, so who says taking a wick and singeing a wick and making a bit of charcoal at the end of the wick, who says that's a problem? So Rashi has to explain that as well.
So between a nami kli, so wick is also a kli.
Yeah.
A charcoal wick. Okay.
Well, he doesn't quite say that. But it just starts with the idea of a wick being a kli. Apparently that's the first step. Rashi wants you to know that a wick is a kli. A tiny little piece of rope, or whatever you call a wick. It's a kli. It's also called a kli.
והיא הדליקה
I think the he goes at the end. It's like it is.
הכי היא, אוקיי, הכי היא. הדליקה
Lahadlaka.
של הצריכה
Asiya.
Asiya v'tikun.
V'tikun.
Okay, so this is to ignite, likely to...
That's its job. In other words, every kli has a job.
Right.
So what's the job of a wick? To light.
To
Be able to light it. And since that's its job, if you do it in, I guess, a better way, then you've made it into a better kli. So it needs...
It needs tikkun. It needs...
an asiya and a tikkun. A doing and making it and refining as well. Right, fixing it up. So I guess he's explaining, I think what he's saying is that a wick that is singed will do a better job. It is called a tikkun, but it seems like he's just talking about the perfection of it is called an asiya. You finally completed the kli, and a tikkun in a way that's productive, that's fixing it up. Okay, so those are two types of making of a kli or perfecting a kli, which is asur on Yom Tov. As we said, perhaps it would have been a havmina that it should be mutter because I'm doing it for the sake of lighting a candle or whatever, and it is mutter to do such a thing on Yom Tov, to light a candle. So, just like sharpening a knife, sometimes is mutter, right? We said there's times when it's asur, times when it's mutter. Right, depending on how you do it, with a shinui or whatever. So perhaps this would have been deemed as being necessary, right? Machshire ohol nefesh. Saying no, not mutter, it's asur. Maybe because it doesn't really make it utilizable. I could really have used it without it, just it perfects it. So Chazal saying, it's all well and good, but you can still get your Simchas Yom Tov even if you don't singe it. Right? You have a wick that needs lighting, and you didn't singe it, it still works, right? Ask every wife who's had to light candles when her husband he forgot to do his job. He forgot to singe it Erev Yom Tov, right? Erev Shabbos. So even though the wife might yell at him for having forgotten his job, but it still was capable.
My wife is feeling so unwell on Shabbos. And I came home after shul, and when I came was
Really, she forgot entirely? Or she just couldn't get
I
out
went
of bed?
in, I said, something's missing.
Happened to my wife once, she forgot.
Second time, so now we're writing 2 extra candles.
Yeah, we like one extra, but yeah. It's definitely whatever.
It was interesting because when I said the kid...
But it's brought down. It says when a husband is supposed to ask, did you do this, did you do that? One of the things is, it doesn't say did you light, because that would be cheeky, because you could see it with your own eyes if she did or didn't. But you see, he's supposed to say it very nicely, please light the candles. So certain of the things he's supposed to ask, did you mafresh challah, did you whatever. There's one or two other questions there. But the one about lighting, the Gemora says, it's not asking did you, because you can see that with your own two eyes if there's either candles lit or not. He said, but it means you're supposed to tell her to do it if she hasn't done it. So really, like I tell my wife all the time, if anything goes wrong, it's always my fault. The Mishnah's making it clear, it's definitely our fault if the wife doesn't light.
Actually, what I did before I left for shul, I don't know why I did it, because I flicked the lights off and on and looked at them. Because you can do that. If you leave your home, you go and eat somewhere, and you come back and the candles are out, at least you can see the lights that you flicked on before you left, right? And
I had the Rava tell some things, you should always do that, regardless of whether you're going out, because otherwise there's no real pleasure in candles, because it's all coming from the electric lights. So he said, how are you making a bracha that you're adding light to the house when it didn't do anything really with all the other fluorescent lights lit and everything? So he said you should always turn the light off and on. It's hard to remember.
But in the bracha, the kiddush, you say you got the Shabbos, right? You look at the lights, you look at the candles.
When she makes her bracha?
When I make the bracha.
You mean when you're doing it for her?
Yeah, when I say Kiddush on a Friday night.
Well, by that time it's already lit. I'm not talking about that time.
No, yeah, it's lit. But
Talking
when
about
you
before.
say Kiddush,
She lights.
yeah, you're always supposed to look at the lights, as you say.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, sorry.
I didn't know that.
Maybe it's about midnight.
Maybe, yeah, it's interesting. I didn't know that. I'm talking about when she lights, he should really try to be there if it's possible, so that
Usually I am.
just before she lights, he turns the lights off, and just after she lights, he turns the lights
Yeah.
back on.
Usually I do.
Apparently, the Rosh spoke about it recently, it's very important to
Oh,
do
you
that.
know what happened? It was Purim, that's right. We
Right.
left early, that's what happened.
Everyone's a bit drunk.
No, it just that we went into shul. We had a late meal on Friday afternoon, and we carried it over into Purim. And a lot of people left it in shul with their ate. Because she wasn't eating there, she left it home. She was supposed to, but didn't. So, yeah.
Well, the Rav spoke about a case in America where it was horrible snow and ice, and someone said she should leave early. They'll drive her to wherever they were eating it for the night, and then she'll only have to worry about getting home. But then they realized by the time she gets home, obviously she can't light, so she'd have to light before she left. But then would probably not even get back in time to enjoy the candles, like you were saying. So
Was this in America?
yeah. I mean, it happens all the time here as well. If a person goes out and he doesn't come back for a long time, he may actually find the kind of candles out, so you never really enjoyed the candles. But whatever. So he said you should try to, when you light, turn off the candles and turn off the extra lights, and then when she lights, then she's getting benefit from the lights, at least at that moment. All right. In the meantime, let's continue on. So the last little bit, Chot Chabur.
The Gemora number Rosh, Mai Shema or Ur,
Right.
Misaki, from a knife. What's
Right.
the difference between a knife and a knife?
What's the difference and why is it better? Why does he think it's better? So I thought it's a shinui, but like I said before, if it's such a clear shinui, then why wouldn't the Tanakama let it? It sounds like it's only Rabbi Huda who lets, but I guess that's part of the reason why the Gemora has to explain it.
See, he's just asking the question.
Yeah, he's saying the Gemora will ask the question, what is the real difference? Meaning, why is it any better? Right? He's agreeing with the Tanakama, you can't cut it with a knife, but he's offering a different way that apparently he thinks is better. And to me, it sounds like the Tanakama disagrees, but one way or the other, he thinks it's better. Why is it better? Why is it any better? Okay, very good. Shall we start the Gemora?
Yep.
Yeah, so it shouldn't be different than cutting a knot with a flame, right?
Huh?
It shouldn't be any different than cutting with a knot with a flame.
It depends how you look at it. You see, a shinui, the Igle Tal, there's a special sefer on Hilchos Shabbos called the Igle Tal. Very, very famous sefer. He really set out to write on all the malachas of Shabbos, but he didn't quite accomplish that. But still, whatever he did, people quote him all the time because he's a very insightful early Achron. In the meantime, he points out something I remember a long time ago hearing, or I think I saw it inside as well, that he says, really, when we talk about a shinui, there's really two types of shinui. There's a shinui that you're doing it differently, but the result is the same. And then there's also doing it differently, and the result is different. In other words, we'll call that a much bigger shinui. So he points out that the idea of shinui is actually something that it's handy to use the shinui to make things mutter, not just in Shabbos, in other areas of the Torah as well. If you do something different, then sometimes it becomes permissible. But he says in other places in the Torah, to be permissible, it has to be the second kind of shinui that actually makes it a different result. Let's say with holding a pen, like when on Cholomoids, people say you should write with a shinui. Some people say the shinui would be to write on an angle instead of on a straight line or whatever. There you get the result being different. It's not right, and some people say just hold it differently. But then you could say, well, if I hold it differently, it won't be such a big shinui because I can write normally just holding it in different fingers. But many people, it's not true. You hold it with different fingers, it's going to come out as slightly more sloppy writing, etc. So it's not as professional, it's not as nice. So, but on Shabbos, it's actually, you don't need as much of a shinui. Like for example, if I turn off the light normally with this finger, I usually use my index finger to turn the light on and off. I think most people use their index finger when they turn the light on and off. Let's say I'm right. So let's say instead I use my pinky. Is that a shinui?
Yeah, it's turning away from the usual.
It's a shinui. It's not. I use a different method to do it, but the result is the same. It's not a better light because if I use my index finger, then if I use my pinky, like the light is not as good. It's the same light. It's just I chose to get that same result with a slightly different pathway, slightly different method, but it comes out the same result. So in many other areas of the Torah, that's not enough to be called a shinui. But in Shabbos, and I assume Yom Tov is the same, it's enough because Shabbos is meleches machshavos. It says in this week's parsha, huh?
We discussed in the Gemora about Meleches Machshavos.
Right. So Meleches Machshavos, part of the idea that one of the things we learn from Meleches Machshavos, it has to be a malacha chashuva. It has to have a certain chashivus. And if you do it with a shinui, it's like less chashuv, right? Even if the result is the same light, but you did it with the, so that's already not Meleches Machshavos. That's what I remember the Iglit's point. So here, let's say I need to get the wick, right? If it's too long, I can't really use it. It's too long to insert into the holder. But if I make it shorter, it'll work perfectly, right? I can fit it into where I need to fit in the wick. But does it really make a difference if I cut it with a knife or I cut it with a candle? Does that make a difference? Not in the result, but in the method. So I would say perhaps that's the point here. Do you need somehow are they arguing about doing it with a different method and being enough? It seems like Rabbi Yehuda says that's enough to make a shinui, and therefore it's permissible. And the Tanna Kama might say no. You need the result to be a bit different also. Like not. They say that, by the way, if you're on a toilet, right? Excuse the example, but it's a practical question often. If a person finds himself on a toilet, especially in a shul, where sometimes they're not always careful to put cut toilet paper, what do?
You don't tear lines.
So you don't tear along lines. But what's the problem with tearing along lines? One of the problems is that if you tear it along the lines, then every piece is the same size as the other piece. Some say that's the real malacha of chatikha, of cutting things up into small pieces, is that if they all end up being the same precise size, so if every time you cut it along the line, you're really making it a perfect tissue, by being the proper size. But if you tear it with a shinui, not along the dotted lines, then it's not the same size, first of all, as every other piece, so therefore you've avoided the problem, as well as being a jagged edge, which means it's not a perfect copy of the other ones. And that's also a reason why it should be permissible.
Sometimes because it's big holes like underneath for any knot.
Yeah, so then it's a little bit better, but I still would be careful to use a bit of a shinui, maybe, instead of tearing it like you would normally tear it between your thumb and forefinger or index finger. I usually use both thumbs and both forefingers. Instead, you use different fingers, right? So again, it's a difference in methodology plus a difference in the result. Usually, the result is more sloppy, is less refined.
Something with folding your tellers. Don't fold the lines.
That's right, or just off the line, exactly. So you don't want to do that. But I'm just saying maybe that's part of the question here. When if you use a flame, still you can aim it exactly where you want. So I think it will be the same size as the other, as a proper wick that you were looking for. So that in that respect, it's a problem. But you did it with a different method. Plus, it is a bit different than when you use a knife. Because when you use a knife, it's just a nice clean cut. We use a a flame, it's going to be, it might not be jagged per se, but at least it will be somewhat rough, a rough cut. You know, it's not a beautiful cut, it's a rough cut. That's what I would think, but I'm not sure if you can really say that. Okay. In the meantime, Rashi already promised us the Gemora is going to talk about it, so we don't really need to discuss it yet. Hopefully when the Gemora gets to it, we'll appreciate the discussion. Okay, so let's start the Gemora. Let's go back. We're basically going back to the original halacha of the Mishnah, which was taking a glob of clay, gouging out a certain amount, and ending up with something that, I guess, is something like a cup. But instead of a cup for drinking, it's like a cup for holding the shemen. That will eventually hold the wick, that will eventually light the fire. Okay, so we said in the Mishnah that is considered to be what? Asr. And why? Because Rosh said it's called making a kli. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Says the Gemora. Who wants to read the Gemora? Gentlemen.
I'm not going to read the Gemora. Man Tana the Pachis Ner.
Pachisas
Pachisas Ner.
Manahu.
Who is the Tana that holds the genetic?
No, not allowed. Never says allowed.
To diminish.
That the diminishing of
the container. Mana.
Manahu.
Container.
Okay, mana means what in Aramaic?
Container.
A kli.
Kli.
Any kind of a kli is called a mana. Not to be confused, by the way, with modern Hebrew mana, like mana rishona, mana shniya. You go to a restaurant, what do you want for your mana rishona? What do you want for the first course, for the second course? Right? In the modern Hebrew, mana with the hay on the end means a portion. Here it's not with a hay, it's a whole different word, and it's a different language, of course, it's Aramaic, so it's a kli, okay?
The Pachisas Ner Mana.
Who?
It's a question?
Yes, so better to take the Pachisas Ner, okay, is a mana who? It is a mana. It is a kli. Okay? So the funny thing is talking about a process of Pachisas Ner, but what it's really talking about is after you do that little Pachisas Ner, you end up with a certain object in your hand. Right? Let's just review what the Rashi told us. You take a glob of clay, you gouge it out, and then you end up with what's left in your hand, a Pachisas Ner. Okay, that's what the Gemora is calling Pachisas Ner. Even though technically Pachisas Ner means it's talking about the process of diminishing the Ner. But what we're really talking about is after you diminish this glob that's going to be the Ner, you end up with something that's an approximate Ner.
Yep.
So Pachisas Ner is like saying Pachisas of the clay that's going to make the Ner. Well, okay, now I have an object in my hand called Pachisas Ner. Okay, that's what I get after this whole thing is over. This whole whatever Rashi explained in the Mishnah. When I do all of that, I get something in my hand called what? Pachisas Ner. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's give it a name in English. An unrefined container for shemen, right? I took clay. Okay, it's funny the word clay and kli are very similar. Plus, if you want to talk about many kelim with the smichut, you call them clay kodesh, clay this.
Oh wow.
It's almost like, a lot of Rev Glazerson says all the English words come from the Hebrew, but so it's very interesting. The clay often does make kelim. Anyhow, so I had this glob of clay, I gouged it out. Now I'm holding in my hand something that's like a cup, okay, but as we said before, it's not for holding a drink, it's for holding shemen, to eventually hold the wick, to hold the nick, to hold the flame. But what am I really holding in my hand? That's the question. It's just a glob of clay that got gouged out. Would you say I really made a kli? Would you say that's called making a kli?
No.
Well,
Not until
review the Mishnah. Review the Mishnah. What did the Mishnah say about this? You're not allowed to do it. Why, said Rashi?
She's making a clean.
Making a kli. So Shabbatai just said that's not called making a kli. It's not called a kli. Okay, and that's the point of the Gemora. It's a weird kind of object somewhere in the middle. Okay, most people wouldn't use such an object, but we'll say it, in our own way. Like in a time of an emergency, I would use it.
It's a pre-key.
It's like a pre-kli, but as I said to you before, yesterday I used the example of Tsama. In Hilchos Tum, we find a lot of these subtleties discussed because it's not going to be Makabel Tum if it's not yet a finished product. So then you get into this question, well, at what exact point do we call it a finished product? That's really what the Gemora is getting into now. And the Gemora is actually going to bring up Hilchos Tumah, just like I promised. So it's really, if you call it a pre-kli, you've basically got yourself into a problem. That's what the Gemora wants to know. Who would call it not a pre-kli? Who would call it a kli without the prefix, right? Don't call it a pre-kli. Don't put that prefix in there, right? Prefix means before the fix. Okay, so who would call it a kli and not a pre-kli, as Shabbatai love to call it? Who doesn't hold like Shabbatai? That's the Gemora's question.
Who holds it's not a clean?
No, he said it's not a kli. He's calling it a pre-kli.
It's going to be fried up in a...
That's right. I mentioned that yesterday. It's missing a normal step in the process, which most people would say is the final step. But if we really say it's not really a finished product, then what should it say in our Mishnah?
It's not a clean.
It's not a kli, so therefore what should it say in our Mishnah?
To.
It should be allowed to do it. I should be allowed to do it. Well, that's the Gemora's question. Who's the Tana that wrote this Mishnah that said it's not a pre-kli? It's a kli. And that's why it's asur. So read it again.
My Tana, who's the Tana holds that the brachis near the dimension of a container, monohus is a kli, it's a pre-kli.
No, you just contradicted yourself. Pre-kli means it's not yet a kli.
It is a kli.
That's right.
Who's the Tana holds that the dimension of a container is considered
It's
a
a
kli.
real kli, not just a pre-kli.
Kli.
Okay? And the Gemora knows that there's a machlokas on that subject, so therefore the Gemora is implying, well, let's just get that straight. Who could be the author of our Mishnah? Because not everybody holds that way. Only certain Tanoim hold that way. So who would be the Tana that holds that way that could be the author of our Mishnah? Okay, so read it again that way.
My Tana, who's the Tana that...
Who's the Tana of our Mishnah, in other words?
Who's the Tana of our Mishnah?
Who would tell you it's asur to do the bechisas ner, because what you end up with
is a money. It's a real kli.
is a real kli, and that's why it's asur to do it, because you're making a kli. Who was that Tana who wrote our Mishnah who holds that way?
Amar Rav Yosef, or Rabbi Meir.
Very good. So now, obviously, we're going to want to be introduced to this Rebbe Meir. Obviously, we know who Rebbe Meir is, but when we're going to see where Rebbe Meir made a statement about such a... Obviously, he's not going to be talking about the exact case of our Mishnah, but something very similar, right? We're going to hopefully see Rebbe Meir arguing with another Tana about a certain level of kli that's not quite finished. And what do we expect to see Rebbe Meir saying about it?
It is a kli.
He should be saying it's a kli.
Even though it's not finished, this process.
Right. Now, even though it's not finished, so you have to say it is finished. That's the point. Right? If it's a kli, it means it's finished. Obviously, you could do more, right? Let's say everybody agrees you could always do more. You could, like when you build a sukkah. Your wife said, build the sukkah, okay? So you built the sukkah. She comes out and says, I told you to build a sukkah. There's no decorations. I say, well, I built the sukkah. Now, if you want me to decorate, it's a new job. Right? Thank you for telling me you want me to do that other job. right? So there's always more. You can always do more, right? Women always make us aware of that. You can always do more. But what's called making a kli, right? If you say it's made, it's made. You can do more, yes, you can do more, but it's enough, right? That people will use it at this point. That's going to be part of the criterion. To know whether something is a finished product, part of the criterion is people would actually use it at this point. Well, maybe some people would and some people wouldn't. And that's usually where you get a machlokus. Some people would and some people wouldn't. You know, where we had a very similar argument regarding Yom Tov. I don't know if you remember this sugya. We had the question of Shavel Kol Nefesh. It says,
Yeah, and cigarettes.
Yeah, cigarettes are the modern day equivalent of where this would come out to be a question. But I think Gemora talked about different things like cleaning things or something. I think I remember that where the Gemora said some people would not do this, would not need to do this.
They were actually talking about scenting clothes. Old clothes are scented fire.
So since some people wouldn't, they wear their clothing without it, so then maybe it's not called Shabbal Kol Nefesh, but they say, well, if they had a chance, they would. And it's a whole question if people would really use this thing. So let's assume this is part of the question over here. So what we seem to want to find in this next Beitsa that we're hopefully going to see in a minute is to see a case that's like ours, that there could be more done to this product, but as it is, certain people would consider it a finished product. And that's enough, right? For our sugi, that would be a question, can you do it on Yom Tiv? If it's really making a kli, you can't. If it's not making a kli, you should be able to do it, apparently. But we said that it's also likely to come into question the question of Tuma and Tara. Because Tuma and Tara is also very much dependent on this question. Is it a finished kli or not? So we're likely to find them arguing in terms of Tuma and Tara. So let's start the Beitsa.
Just before we get there, I remember that piece you just said.
Yeah.
We were talking about filling a container with incense and then closing it off and opening it just before the visitors arrived.
Oh, yeah.
That was the one thing. And the other thing you spoke about was sweeping the carpet, sweeping the floor, covering it with a carpet,
Right.
and then uncovering it just before the visitors
Right, because
arrive.
people want to see a nice clean floor.
Right.
I remember there were a few things that brought in over there. Very nice, very nice. It bears reviewing. You have a whole month to review, by the way. I hope you guys take advantage of it.
We will.
All right. And we make a siyum, which should come. Maybe we'll make. Who knows? We may make a siyum by Shavuos or something. How many more pages we got here? 8 pages. No, not even. 38 pages, so we're already on Mama base. It's only 6 pages, right? No, not even 30. It's 35 pages. Goes up to 35. Oh no, I'm making a mistake. Goes up to
38.
not even 40. 40. Goes up to 40. Right? It's like the conception of a child. It goes up to 40. That makes sense. Beitsa is like things that we conceived.
No.
All right, so we may not be able to finish, I think, 8 blot by the time Shavuos comes, but at least gives us something to maybe during the summer, maybe right before Tisha B'Av, we could try to aim for that. Who knows? Okay.
What can we do after Beitsa?
I don't know. We could do it. You guys should think about it. Whatever you want to do, it's fine. All right. In the meantime, so we have this Beitsa. Let's start the Beitsa. Who was reading just now? Sruli. So Shabbatai, you want to try the Beitsa?
Sure. Tanya, 3 Paris. So in the Beitsa, we talk about a kli of clay,
Right. Pottery.
My metai.
That's the first word in all of Shas, by the way.
From when it's time.
Right. And in Shema, they're talking about time of day. Here we're talking about from when in the process,
right.
Manufacturing process.
Makabel Tuma. From which time? It's asking a question.
Right.
Which time
At what point, in other words, can we say it's a finished product and now it's Makabel Tuma?
Right. Misha Nigmara, from the time that it's finished.
Good.
Machoso.
Melachto.
its work. Right at the time it's finished.
Now that sounds very simple and like, not a big hiddush, because we were always talking about it needing to be a finished product to be makabel tuma. But we'll see in the next Manda Omer what the real machlokus is. So before we send the jury out on this one, let's just see the next little bit. Okay, so now we've met Rabbi Meir. That's the one we were looking for. But who's he arguing against? At what point is he really arguing?
Rabbi Yeshiva. Rabbi Yeshua Omer.
Yitzarfu.
The Kavashim.
Kivshan.
By the time it's burnt in a kiln.
Right, it gets fired up in the kiln. And that, we said yesterday, is what really strengthens a kli. It dries it out, it strengthens it, it makes it what we would call a finished product. The truth is today we had to do one more thing usually before we sell it or use it, is glaze it. Right? Usually we get like china. It's not just a pottery, not just a piece of pottery, it's glazed over to get that shiny, smooth feel to it. Whereas a real pottery has like a roughness to it. There's a bit of a roughness to it. But if you glaze it over, you can make it smooth and shiny and more enjoyable. In any event, okay, so that's the question. What in our own terminology, what would you say the machlokus is? Between Rebbe Meir and whom?
And Tanakama.
He was a Tanakama.
And Rabbi Yeshua.
Right. So the machlokus Rebbe Meir and Rebbe Yeshua is, right, a certain object that we're talking about over here, whatever that object is. In order for it to be makabel tuma, i.e., to call it a finished product, do you need it
to be fired up?
To be fired up in the kiln, right? To put in the oven where it gets properly hardened and dried out, right? Do you need that? Or if you don't need that, who's the one that says you don't need that? Rabbi Meir, okay? And our Gemora is saying that's very similar to our case, where all he did was hollow out the glob of clay. Because now that he has that cup in his hands, it's a cup of clay, basically. Moist clay. Okay?
Yeah.
So the Gemara is comparing that to the case where Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yoshua are arguing, even though they're arguing about what? Seemingly any normal piece of pottery. So all pottery starts out as clay, and only the reason why you start calling it pottery usually is when you fire it up in the kiln, then it becomes pottery. In modern parlance.
Clay pottery can makabel tuma?
Rashi is actually going to explain different halachas about it. Not always as a makabel tuma, but many cases of it are makabel tuma. We're going to see maybe only on Sunday when we get to the final steps in this question, but yes, it definitely is makabel tuma, but not necessarily all forms of tuma in all of its manifestations. It means it might need other features to be able to cover all tuma. But in any event, yes. So our Gemora is saying, who is the author of our Mishnah?
It's Rabbi Meir.
Rabbi Meir. Because our Mishnah says what? When I took that glob of clay and I gouged it out, and I'm holding in my hand what? A moist cup, which is made out of clay, but has not been fired up in the kiln. And would I really use it at this point? So according to Rabbi Meir, yes. Right? Let's say in a situation where you really need to, you would consider this. Many people would consider this a finished product. So therefore, in our Mishnah that comes out, the result of that is that what? Since it's a finished product,
it's a clean.
So that's why our Mishnah says what? You can't do it. You can't make such a kli. You can't even do that first step of gouging it out, because that really does make it into a kli. Sorry. Whereas according to Rabbi Yeshua, would you be able to do it on Yom Tov?
Yes.
Yes. Because before you put it in the kiln, it's not a really finished object, so therefore you can't say, I made a kli on Yom Tov. I didn't make a kli. Not a finished product. Right? That comes out in our Mishnah, that the Gemora is saying in our Mishnah that to be Asur on Yom Tov, it has to be such a finished product that it can be Makabal Tumah. If it's for some reason not yet finished enough to be Makabal Tumah, then it should be mutter to do on Yom Tov. So Rabbi Yeshua has said it's mutter.
So it's the Tumah that makes the decision here?
It's like the proof of the pudding.
Oh.
The proof of whether it's a finished product is the question. It's like the acid test. Can it be Makabal Tumah at this stage?
Mm-hmm.
If you say yes, then you're really considering a finished product, and then it should be also to do that level of Kli on Yom Tov.
It leaves a question.
Or what?
It leaves a question.
What does it leave a question?
What happens if this doesn't Makabal Tumah? Naturally.
Then what?
You can still make it?
That's what I just said. The Gemora is saying that. Because the Gemora says, who would have said our Mishnah? Who would have said our Mishnah that it's Asur? Only Rabbi Meir.
Yeah.
Rabbi Shua would not have said our Mishnah. That's what the Gemora just finished saying.
Because
That's what the Gemara said. Who wrote our Mishnah? It has to be someone who considers this to be a Kli. And the Gemara said it's Rabbi Meir.
yeah, but the
That's
difference
clearly saying, but according to Rabbi Yeshua, it would not.
because of the kiln though.
But that's the point. He says pre-kiln
Yeah.
is pre-Kli. Kiln and Kli is the same letters, by the way.
You know, but I'm saying something slightly different. What happens if it's like made out of material that doesn't naturally Makabal Tumah? Let's say you said earlier that certain Tumah.
Oh, no. If you say it's a finished product, and if it would have been Makabal Tumah, it would have been Makabal Tumah. If it happens to be some weird styrofoam, isn't Makabal Tumah? I don't know.
Right.
If you give me a material that's just not Makabal Tumah, that doesn't mean anything. It's just, being Makabal Tumah is just a proof it's a finished product. That's all. So in our case, we have a proof that Rabbi Yeshua doesn't consider it a finished product, so then the Gemara is saying clearly it would have been mutter to make it on Yom Tov.
Can we need to finish in a few minutes?
What?
Need to finish it fun.
You want to turn off the clock, the camera? I'll take a break for that even before you fire it up in the kiln, it's a finished product, enough to be Makabal Tumah. And our Gemora is saying that would also be enough to make it Asur to do on Yom Tov. According to Rabbi Yeshua, that's not enough. Says the Gemora, let's go on, we'll hopefully catch up with the Roshis on Sunday. Keep going, who's reading? Amalei Abaye, last two words on the line.
Amalei Abaye says
To him, who's the person he's talking to?
to
Who originally spoke?
progressive.
Right. Who was his Rebbe, so it makes sense. Says to his Rebbe,
Mine is from where do we know?
I mean, what? How do you really know? How do you really know? From what? Meaning, how do you really know? Because Dilma.
Perhaps I can look on Remeir Hassan. Perhaps until now Remeir didn't say over there, Ella.
Yeah, but instead of getting all into the, he didn't say Ella, say it in positive. He only said his point. Rabbi Meir only said his point that it's called a finished product. Because
it's fitting to accept
to receive
in
it
meeting
something, right? Now Rashi goes all in here with explaining that we're talking about a larger kli, or let's say a big plate, okay? And even if it's not going to be used for what I would originally have used, I can use it for something else. I can use this big plate to carry something, to hold something, okay? So that's Rashi's point, because it's a bigger kli. Whereas what? Hacha. That's right. Here, what?
What is it fitting to accept?
Right. Here we're talking about tiny little things, right? If you remember at Hanukkah time, right? Those little containers that hold the oil, how big are they? They're like little shot glasses. What could they contain? If you're not going to use them for what they're normally used for, what else could you use them for? So the Gemora didn't really think there's something alternative. Remember we talked about the bricks? We said the bricks are not muktzah because you have another usage for them. It's almost the same question over here. If you're not going to be able to use them for their normal usage because they're not yet fired up in the kiln, what else could you use them for to make them a finished product? To be a finished product, it has to have a good usage, right? To make people want to use it at this point. So the Gemora is saying that for a bigger container, I can understand that when it's not fired up in the kiln, it's not ready for its real job, it can still do alternative jobs. But this tiny little thing, what else could it do if it's not going to be used for your shemen or whatever, right? So the Gemora answers, there is something.
Shita, Ikad Amri.
Yeah, you know what Ikad Amri means?
For those who said those who hold.
Which normally is a way of introducing
Another alternative
version of what we just said. So you don't want to run it into what you just said. You don't want to give an answer that goes into an Ikad Amri, because it's like saying, there are those who say, but that's not part of your answer. That's a new version. So you have to stop before the Ikad Amri. So what's the answer? No, that's a new version. I need an answer to the question in the first version.
I don't know.
The Gemora asks the question, what are you going to use these small little nerot that haven't been fired up in the kiln? What alternative could you use them for? Pshiti. You know what pshiti are?
Obvious.
No, that's pshita. Pshiti, when you have a yud at the end of a word in Aramaic, you know what that represents?
It.
Huh?
It.
Often it means it's a plural word. Okay? So instead of yud mem, there's just yud.
Wicks.
No, I'm just talking about the yud for right now. So it's an object. Right? We're talking about an object. With the yud makes it whatever object we're talking about. It's a lot of them. Okay, what are we talking about? You know what pshiti are? Now I have two pshatim. Excuse the pun. It's either to hold little pieces of copper. That's what I think pshiti are. And it could even be little prutos, right? The smallest kind of a coin, which are made out of copper, right? So it's like pennies, little pennies. Okay, it's either the pennies themselves or little pieces of copper that would make up a penny, that could be used for a penny.
Little coins.
It's either little coins or maybe even pshiti, or I think, if I remember correctly, the word pshiti can be used to describe little bits of metal that are going to be made up into something. But meaning, sometimes you have small little objects like thumbtacks or whatever that you need a container for them, right? Like in the old days, people used to use tin cans. If they were after they took the sardines out of the tin can, they would save it for their nails and their small screws and stuff, right? Anyone remember those days? Yeah, I'm sure everyone remembers. Okay. But today they would never would ever use a, right?
Sardine can.
Yeah. But that's what the Gemora is saying. You could use these small little things that are really supposed to be used for lighting a candle, for shemen and a wick and everything, but if it's still not fired up in a kiln, it may not be really good for that yet. But you could use it for something else. You could use it for holding little bits of copper, or little coins.
So the pshiti is actually a coin?
I can't remember personally whether it's with the coin or without the coin, but they're small pieces of metal.
Uh-huh.
And I believe they're copper, small, little, tiny. But I believe it's sometimes used to describe small, like the smallest coin. A pruta is the smallest coin. So it could be just means like pennies, right? Like you used to have a little cup for holding all your spare change.
Yeah.
Okay, something like that. Whether it's the actual coin or without being a coin, it's just same idea. Small little objects that you don't want to just throw in the garbage, but you don't want to just leave lying around either. So you put them in a little tiny cup. So that's it. That's what he's saying. It is fitting for that. So let's just get it straight what the Gemora is saying before the Ikeda Amri, so we have to start on Sunday. The Gemora is saying, who really authored our Mishnah? Rebbe Meir. What was the objection? Who says that Rebbe Meir would call this a kli? Yes, he calls it over there regarding Tum and Tar. He's talking about a much bigger kli, that even if you haven't fired up in a kiln, it has a good usage. So it could be considered a finished product. But who says he'll consider our tiny little thing here, I'm using Rashi's jot, to be a kli? Maybe he wouldn't agree this is a kli. So maybe we have to keep looking for another author to our Mishnah. who would consider this thing to be a kli. Gemora says no, he would consider this to be a kli. Just like over there it's a kli without being in the kiln, here it would be without. What can you do with it? You'll store your little bits of metal in it. It has a usage, but to be a kli, it has to have a usage. Okay, guys, please try to review it. So we'll start on Sunday.
Yes, very nice.